So everybody, please help me welcome Brandon Sanderson.
Thank you very much, and thank you guys for coming. So, this book started about 5 years ago. I was on tour on the East Coast for the very first time, and I insisted on driving myself. See, very early in my career, when I'd started as a writer, I had persuaded my publisher to let me drive up the coast here on the West Coast. I knew the West Coast pretty well. I figured I could save money that way. When I'd originally asked for a signing, they'd been very hesitant because it can be very expensive, so I convinced them to let me do it. Did anyone ever see me during one of those signings? I was traveling with David Farland and Lee Modisett. Back in the day, we'd like all pile in one car and drive up the coast to do the economic signing. So I got very used to this. I got very good at driving myself, so I thought, oh, I can do it on the East Coast. I've done it up the West Coast every year for 3 years. And so I convinced them to let me rent a car and drive myself around. And this is the last time they ever let me drive myself anywhere on tour. Because I managed to get myself very lost. It turns out that driving on the East Coast in places like D.C. and Boston is a little bit different than even the chaos out here sometimes in the West. To compound this, I had actually managed to go without a phone. You see, I had left my computer in the airport. Not that big a deal, even though it sounds terrible. I had my brother-in-law grab it for me, but it had my phone cord with it, and that meant my phone ran out of batteries on the first night in the East Coast, and I thought, I can do this, right? I lived for how many years without one of these dumb things? I can get myself around, right? Yeah, well, not having a GPS, and not having a phone that had all my phone numbers in it. Apparently, I'm incapable of calling anyone, or remembering any numbers anymore. Well, you know, once upon a time, I'd remember all the numbers. Now, it's like I can barely get my wife's phone number out, let alone my agent's or anyone else's. And so, I'm supposed to be going to Pittsburgh, and I am lost somewhere in Montana. And driving around in circles in the woods somewhere. There's like some guy with buck teeth playing the banjo beside the road, and I'm just completely, totally, and utterly lost. And I'm stressed out. As you might imagine, me being stressed out, because here I am trying to get where I'm supposed to be going, and I've got about a 2-hour drive ahead of me. I think I was actually in West Virginia somewhere, maybe. I don't know. But I had to get to Pittsburgh, and in this state, somebody cut me off in traffic. Now, I'm not normally a very high-tempered person, right? I'm pretty even keel. I don't have a temper. I'm okay, but you know, I was really stressed out, and things were really, you know, really worrisome to me. And so having someone cut me off in traffic at that moment, I had this flare of anger, and I thought, you person, if I had superpowers, I would blow your car up right now. Just boom. I can imagine it. Like, I imagine myself like the energy bolt just going BAM! Flipping the car end over end, smoke trailing from it, you know, 5 explosions on the way. It was a great special effect. And then after this, watching this car and imagining all of this happening, I was horrified, right? Because I'd grown up reading fantasy novels, right? I bet a lot of you have as well. You know, I'd imagined many times what would happen if I had superpowers. What if I had the will and the word, right? What if I could channel? What would I do? What kind of, you know, how awesome would that be? And in this moment, I kind of had a vision of what could go wrong if someone like myself were capable of blowing up cars with a thought. Was actually really frightening to me. Like, this whole spending my life thinking about having all these powers, and in that moment realizing I probably would have blown that car up. I totally would have. So it's a good thing I don't have these powers. So having this powerful emotional reaction, and being a writer, my immediate response was, well, how can I use this in a book? And so instead of being stressed out, it was actually a good thing. I spent the next 2 hours dreaming of a novel. Which is where books start, right? Most authors are going to say the same thing. For me, there's an idea. Usually it'll run into other ideas and they'll mix in an interesting way to form a book, but there's something that makes you passionate as a writer. I've done this for many years now. I started writing my first book when I was 15, maybe 16, and I finished my first one when I was 22. So I've written almost 30 novels, I think, now. I've finished, of which half of them have been published. So I watch for those ideas that make me really excited, if that makes sense. Like, as a writer, you have ideas, and you discard them all the time because most of them are dumb. Most of them are lame. But these ideas that really get you excited, that 2 hours later have expanded into something amazing, that you're still thinking about, those are the ideas we get, because for me, that's what keeps me going. That's what makes me really excited to keep doing what I'm doing 30 books later. It's these ideas that make me say I have to write this book. And for Steelheart, it was this concept of what would we do if everyone who started gaining superpowers used them for the wrong reasons? What would society do? How would we react? It felt like a cool post-apocalyptic story I could write in a different way. An apocalypse caused by people getting what they'd always dreamed of having. Superpowers. I imagined, what could the United States do? What could any country do if Superman decided, yeah, I just like this city, I'm going to take over and be its emperor? What could we do if someone walked into the Barnes & Noble here and said, all right, everybody, give me your phones, otherwise I'll, burn you to a cinder with my mind. People we can't throw in prison, people we can't fight. So I imagined the country passing an act just called the Capitulation Act, where they said, these things are acts of nature. We aren't going to try to hold them to the rule of law because we just can't. Any more than we can make a hurricane obey the laws that we want it to obey. And that just was fascinating to me, like the social implications of that. So I got finally to my book signing in Pittsburgh, and I ran inside to meet my agent, and I took him by the shoulders and I said, I have an idea for a book. And he's used to me by that point. He was very used to me because, see, I kind of accidentally write novels I'm not supposed to. This happened early in my career, kind of by happenstance. I would finish a book that I was working on, and instead of going into the next book I was working on, I would find myself doing something completely different. This is where my middle grade series, Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, came from. This is where a lot of my early kind of shorter books came from. Things like Legion, things like Emperor's Soul, things like The Arithmetist, which I actually wrote in 2007. These are books that came between other books, and I came to learn that my process was to finish a big, thick novel, which I love doing, the big epic fantasies, but at that point I would need a break, and I would want to do something very different to refresh myself so that I didn't start the next big, thick epic fantasy novels feeling burned out on that process. And this made me much more productive, but it also meant that books early in my career popped out I wasn't expecting. Now I can plan for it. Then I just call my agent. Like when I wrote Alcatraz, I called him and I said, so I accidentally wrote a book. He said, aren't you supposed to be writing the third Mistborn novel? And I said, yeah. I wrote a middle grade adventure fiction novel instead. It's called Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians. And he'd never heard of this. He's like, what? He hadn't had authors accidentally write books before. Now he's used to it. I show up with this idea and he's like, oh no. What book are you going to accidentally write this time? And I started telling you about it. And he's like, this sounds really good, Brandon, but didn't you just agree to finish The Wheel of Time? This was 2009, I think, or maybe 2008. It was Mistborn 3 tour, so whenever that was. And so the first Wheel of Time book wasn't out. I was working on it, though. So I scratched my head and said, yeah, I did. And he said, didn't you just talk to Tom Doherty about the Stormlight Archive, which you've been working on for 20 years, and you're really excited to do? And I said, yeah, I'm really excited to do that book, too. And he said, so when are you going to write this one? Just kind of, he's like bracing himself for when am I going to have to go tell the publishers, no, Brandon didn't write that book he promised you he was going to write. He wrote this other one instead. But I promised him, like when I had agreed to take the Wheel of Time, one of the things I told myself, and I kept strict to this, was that I was going to shelve a lot of my side projects. That I was going to try to avoid doing too many things that were not the Wheel of Time, just to keep myself focused and get that ending into people's hands. And I did a fairly good job of it. And quite a bit of stuff actually came out. But for instance, I had written The Arithmetist, and I said, if I release this right now, I will not be able to do any sequels to this book. until the Wheel of Time is done. So I'll shelve that. And Steelheart was the same way. Even though I let myself write on it, taking breaks from larger books, I told myself I can't release this book. I can't do anything with it until the Wheel of Time is done, because if I do, I don't want people to have to wait years for a sequel. It was even, Way of Kings, which I did release in the middle. We've had to wait 3 years now before I could do a sequel because I felt committed to finishing the Wheel of Time and doing that. But once the Wheel of Time was done, it was like Steelheart became my prize to myself. It was the book that I finished up writing in between the last Wheel of Time book and the second Stormlight Archive book, which I have finished, and it is coming out in March. Yay! But the book in between was Steelheart, and it was a blast to write. Some books are just pure fun. And this was one of those books that was pure fun. I got to go around telling people, I'm writing a book about a young man who decides to get revenge upon the Emperor of Chicago. And you can just, sometimes some things you just say and people are like, oh, Emperor of Chicago, this is a different type of book. It was really fun to tell people. So I hope you guys enjoy this book. I hope you pick it up and give it a look. It is really, really fun. Though I'm not going to read to you from that book. Because when I do readings at my signings, I feel like I should read something you can't just stroll over to the bookshelf and get and read. I like to read things that are unpublished as a special treat. My agent doesn't like this because he's like, you should read them books they can go buy, Brandon. This is good marketing. I've never been that great at that sort of marketing. I like to read things that are exciting and fun. So I actually am going to read you from Words of Radiance, which is the sequel to Way of Kings.